Okay, so now we're going to study the Indigenous principles once again, our second session, and we are going to contrast Indigenous principles against traditional principles for missions. And we'll start off with our intro by reading page 22, the first two full paragraphs from Melvin Hodges' book, The Indigenous Church. Some years ago, a group sent missionaries overseas. Their primary interest was to give a Christian witness to all the earth. They based their objective and methods on Jesus' statement in Matthew 24:14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Desiring to hasten the Lord's return and realizing that the Great Commission must be fulfilled before that time, they decided that missionaries should not tarry in any one place for an extended time. Rather, they should push on from city to city and give each place the gospel witness. When social betterment is the principal objective of a mission, the tendency usually is to develop institutions such as schools, hospitals, and agricultural projects. These are worthy projects. Every Christian wants to help improve the lives of those around them. However, according to the New Testament plan, social betterment is a byproduct rather than the heart of a missionary program. If we fail to see this, we build strong institutions, but the church usually remains weak. So, Hodges is talking about a group that went as fast as they could to as many places and spent a short period of time. Then he contrasts it to those that want to put down roots and build institutions. One more quote from Hodges before we go on is found on page 24 of the same book. The idea of a church pattern after the New Testament model is possible because the gospel has not changed. I like that. The gospel has not changed. God has not changed, and His Holy Spirit is with us as He was with the church in New Testament times. So when you get in your theology, there's a whole section on the immutability of God, that He does not change. We do not propose to introduce a new pattern or system. Hodges doesn't, and neither do I. We simply desire to return to the New Testament pattern and see a church founded that will bear the characteristics of the apostolic model. It is possible because the gospel is universal and adaptable in every climate and race to every social and economic level. So what I tell everyone is that if you use Indigenous principles, the Church of Jesus Christ can be planted at any culture, at any time in history, with any people group, and it will produce fruit. I say it in a short phrase: any time, at any place. Any time, at any place. Now I'm going to talk to you about a friend of mine who founded World Indigenous Missions. His name was Myron Anderson. Myron Anderson got saved in the, I think, 1955 at a Billy Graham meeting. And from my recollection, him and one of his relatives, Danny Ost, founded the Missionary Revival Crusade in 1957. So they wanted to take the gospel, first of all, to Mexico. And Mexico was the Wild West back in the late 50s and early 60s. But Myron actually moved into Mexico with a church planning plan that he got from watching other traditional missionaries work. And the plan went something like this: go into an area that doesn't have a church and build a church building. Usually a pretty good building, something that would almost look like one of our churches in America. Nice, good block building or a brick building. Then what you do is you preach the gospel, get some converts, and when you find a promising young man, you send him to a Central Bible College. And then after you've paid for his education, you bring him back and you install him as the pastor. So now you have built a building, you've paid for somebody's education, and you've installed him or hired him. Maybe you could even find someone that had already been to Bible school. But Myron was paying a pastor, and he had built a building. And then he would come to that building with clothes and food, and the church would fill up. So now you have a building full of people, and they're listening to preaching. But it was built on the idea of the American missionary or the foreigner coming in and providing all this stuff. Well, then he went and did that in another place. So then on one Sunday, he would be at the one place handing out clothes and food, and it would be full. Then the next Sunday, he would go to the other one, also had someone that he had hired as a pastor working there. But when he wasn't at the one giving away clothes and food, guess what? Hardly anybody came. About 25% of the congregation that was there to get the food and the clothes were there to hear the young man preach. And he continued, and in 10 years' time, he had 4 of those. It took him 10 years to build 4 church buildings and raise up 4 pastors that were going to be paid by him to work there. Then he had heart trouble and had to be off the field for 6 months. And while he was gone, everything he did those 10 years evaporated. There was nothing left after only 6 months of the missionary not being there. He even told me a story that one time, while he was still in the midst of building one from another, that he got a letter from the pastor of one of the churches. Now, he was paying the pastor more than that pastor would have been able to earn working in his local economy there. And the pastor wrote him a letter and said, "Brother Myron, I need more money." So Myron wrote him back, "Why do you need more money? You got a building, you have a good salary." He says, "I need to hire somebody to come and cut the grass, on your church building. That this is your building, and even though I'm making twice as much as I would in the local economy, I can't cut grass. That's and then now you're starting to get into the whole thing of the whole clergy laity now. So you don't get me started on this, but Jesus says, "I hate the teaching of the Nicolaitans," which means clergy over laity. And I just think that you can develop some bad ideas. Now let me say something about money, and we're going to be talking about money specifically later in these teachings. But money's not evil, but the love of money is the root of all evil. And when you get someone that's not even willing to serve, to cut a grass at a church that they're pastoring, there's something wrong. But anyway, Myron was so discouraged after dealing with these people for 10 years, and he realized that when he was there giving away the money and the clothes and the food, the church was full and he wasn't there, so they weren't coming to hear the Word of God. And some of the missionaries in Asia call these rice Christians. They come when there's rice, but when there's not rice, they don't come. One young man, Myron would give white shirts to young men that he thought would be potential preachers. And every time he saw this one young man, he gave him a white shirt. And, I'm going to make you a preacher someday. Well, the guy quit coming to church after a while. So Myron went to visit him and said, "Why don't you come to church anymore?" And he says, "I have enough white shirts." So you see, the rice Christian mentality, people coming to get something, giving stuff away. So when this crisis happened and everything evaporated, Myron felt like throwing in the towel. He wanted to quit being a missionary because you know what? I've invested 10 years and there's nothing to show for it. I've just wasted my time. But then he got a hold of a book by a missionary that served in China, and his name was J.O. Fraser, or Fraser, F-R-A-S-E-R. And the book was titled Behind the Ranges. And this missionary, Fraser, used indigenous principles to plant the church. That he was not going to give them rice to serve God. Actually, he was going to make no financial inducements for anyone to serve God. And Myron studied that book, and he got a guy that came along to help him named Paul Kohler, and Paul was a big fan of this book, Missionary Methods, St. Paul's or Ours, and also had read some of the other books. So I would read to you out of the Indigenous Church, pages 28 and 29, and then we're going to tell the rest of the story of what happened with Myron. This just talks about a mission agency. Here is a mission agency sincerely devoted to assuming a creditable share of world evangelism. Missionary candidates and funds are available for developing the field in question. Land is purchased and extensive buildings erected. Missionary homes, churches, schools, hospitals, dormitories, medical clinics, and other outreaches. Workmen are hired, and provision is made for youth to enter school. When workers are trained, they are placed on salary with funds from the home office. The missionary, whose time and energies are fully occupied with the business of managing the vast community, anticipates that this will probably be his home for years to come. So he provides for the extras that make the plan comfortable and convenient. He is the undisputed master over this establishment. Funds for workers, teachers, and preachers flow through his hands. He hires or dismisses at will. If a church springs up, it is under his direct supervision. He feels impelled to remain as director of this, his sphere of influence and operation as long as he remains a missionary. When itinerating, he describes the progress made, the buildings erected, the institutions operating, the number of workers employed. He presents pictures of the whole project. He may even appeal for additional missionaries. After 15 to 20 years of this type of work, he may wonder why the church does not show some signs of standing on its own feet. The workers do not manifest any initiative. The people do not show any concern for the salvation of their neighbors or manifest a willingness to assume financial responsibility for any phase of the work. He realizes that his removal from the oversight of the mission would bring the whole project to a standstill unless another missionary took over. What is the reason for this? Simply the plan he followed. He treated the people like irresponsible children. He led them, thought for them, relieved them of all financial responsibility. He unintentionally robbed them of the practical process that develops strong characters in any walk of life, wherever they may live. Now here's the part that's really sad. Actually, he founded a sort of spiritual hospital over which he must be the chief nurse as long as it remains. His life work has become a liability instead of an asset. He sowed his leadership and domination and provision of every need, and he reaped the servitude and malnutrition of a community of underdeveloped spiritual children. Avoiding this result is difficult in a mission that runs predominantly to institutional development. Now, Hodges was actually quoting a guy named George R. Upton, and that's found on pages 28 and 29 of his book. So I just want to say that if you've been a parent, you don't carry your child until he's 5 or 10 years old. If you do, that child will never walk. You don't take a child and say, here, let me do that for you, because then they'll never learn how to do it for themselves. So traditional approach to missions. Money for evangelism and church buildings. Send the local or native person, potential leader, to a central Bible college and then pay for that, of course. Now I have a few questions. Now if someone from the crowd wants to answer this would be good. So you're going to have to think fast because you say it and I'll repeat it to get it on the DVD. But if you go into a place and you say, okay, we're going to send somebody to Bible school, who can go from a community, say down in the middle of Mexico that's a farming community? Who could go to a Bible school from that place?
Nobody.
Well, Chris says nobody. Well, for sure not a man that's got 6 or 7 kids that's running a farm. Possibly a young man could go. Maybe a teenager. Maybe somebody 12, 15 years old that, well, we could maybe spare one farmhand to send to this Bible school. But who are the natural leaders of a village or a town or a ranch? It's the elder men that might not even know how to read or write. And they can't go away for a year or 2 or 3. So you're going to send someone that's not really a natural leader, and then when they come back, the next question is that young man ever really accepted as the spiritual leader of the community? No, he's not. He is not. He is there because the missionary said he's the leader. So we're going to contrast the idea of sending them away to a central Bible college to having a local Bible institute there, maybe monthly seminars for 1 or 2 days when it's not the big planning season, when the men can be there. But then you can train people that don't even know how to read, how to be leaders in the church of God. It doesn't say, make disciples of all nations, teach them how to read, get them a bachelor's degree in theology, and then the end shall come. And so we're going to get into a lot of things that my friend Paul Kohler has developed about telling God's stories with power. And he's raised up a whole generation of evangelists, and he doesn't call them illiterate. He calls them non-readers. Reading is not necessary, but reading is necessary to go to a Central Bible College and to get a bachelor's degree in our Western way of thinking. So I think that using non-traditional principles cuts off a lot of our potential leaders. So what happens after the young man comes back? Well, here's another problem we found out. What do you think happens when a young man gets used to living in a nice dormitory with a bed and 3 square meals a day and maybe a fan or an air conditioner? A lot of times they don't even go back to the place where they came from. Okay, another thing about paying the pastor and the staff. What happens to the initiative of the people? It kills it. Another thing, whose building is it? It's yours. They won't even paint the buildings. They won't do anything to the building if you build it. So, and then when the missionary dies or leaves or is withcalled or withdrawn, the thing collapses. Now, I have heard it said that if you give a man a free lunch for 99 days, then on the 100th day, tell him that you can no longer afford to do so, he will curse you to your face. Now that's the plan. You give somebody a free lunch for. Now somebody here should try this. At one class I was teaching, I think in Florida or Alabama, somebody was going to try that. I don't have enough money to buy 99 lunches for somebody. And this, there again, I'm quoting this stuff. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sounds good, so we're going to go with it. Okay, let's finish up the Myron Anderson story, and then we're going to move on to our next class. But Myron got a hold of these books, and him and Paul Kohler decided that they would go to a place in Mexico called the Huasteca, San Luis Potosi, and they would make no financial inducements to anybody to serve God. All they did was preach the gospel. And the Lord confirmed his word with sign following. And when they started a church and got believers gathered, then they went and started another one. And then they started another one. See, when you start multiple ones at a time, you don't have enough time to do 2 or 3 services a week for the one local church. So you tell them, okay, well on Wednesday night, you guys pray. I'm not going to be here. Just get together, read a psalm, and pray. The first time somebody brings a guitar to service, show them a few songs and say, while I'm not here, you do that. And you begin to develop. Paul Kohler even said the first time a native brings his guitar is the last time I bring mine. Paul was a pretty good guitar player and a pretty good singer. I didn't actually follow that method completely, but I started teaching the local people how to sing and how to worship, either with or without instruments. It really doesn't matter, but you teach them songs. They can sing, they can pray, they can raise up the offering. They can administer that money. We're going to talk about that later. But anyway, they went from one village to another. And then another principle that we're going to talk about is called the Bridges of God with Donald McGavran. A lot of times you'll start a work in one village and they'll say, hey, I have a cousin in another village that's 3 miles from here or 5 miles from here. And then you go with them as an invited guest and start the same thing there. So you start these missions, these Bible studies. Well, these 2 missionaries did that for 3.5 years. And then they felt like their assignment of living in that location was done. So they both moved out of the location. But the gospel was being preached in 40 towns or villages by all local people. Now, they still visited after they moved out of the area. They would come once a month and do seminars. They would usually get there on like a Friday night. They'd have a big church meeting and then all-day teachings on Saturday. Big Saturday night meeting with everybody, and a lot of times close it out on Sunday morning. So they do 2 to 3 day seminars, and all the churches would send representatives. And a lot of these representatives did know how to write and would take notes, but those that didn't know how to write would just listen and would go back and tell the stories that they had heard. So I'm going to close this session with a question. How many people think working for 10 years and having nothing to show for it is good? Okay, no, nobody raised their hand here. For those watching in TV land, no one raised their hand. Okay, how many think that 3.5 years and 40 towns and villages having the gospel preached is better? Okay, everybody raise their hand. All right, and we are done for lesson 2.